right, so here we're going to be adding an image, and we'll add a couple two different kinds just so you can see it at work. So first thing is, what I just did is I made my logo, and I also added something to images. Now, if and when you do this outside of the Dreamweaver folder, which you will, even though we have declared our sites here, when we did the manage sites, sometimes it takes a while for this to show up. And so if it doesn't remember or doesn't know yet that it's actually sitting there, what you want to do is hit this refresh button, and then anything that's been recently placed will show up appropriately here. Okay, so first thing here, I'm going to go ahead and put the logo up here. So I'm going to delete this text. And I'm going to show a couple of different ways to include images in your stuff. So here, the quickest way that I like to do it is just to simply be over here in your file section, click on that file, and simply drag it into that space. And, that generally works fairly well. I have an extra return here. Now, one thing you're probably noticing is that, my logo is pushing outside of my document, right? This div area is not correct. But remember that I added a height to it. And so this is when, okay, I can take the heights off because now it's actually hurting the design. So over in my split view, just so you can see it, I'm going to change that in my code. So if you remember, and I'm clicking over here, in this zone, that's going to be, if you're unsure of where it is, you can look in your body area and it will be highlighted because I'm in that section. And so if I come up here to the logo section, you can see I declared the height. I'm simply going to remove that entire line. You could also just you could write auto here instead, but it does the same thing if you don't have it. And then it actually pushes to include it. Now, if my image was going to remain have this pretty awful looking purple with the blue at least, I would probably have to use some padding to push in the logo from the edge. Eventually though, my colors are going to be the same colors as the background, so I'm not worried about that right now. The other thing you probably are noticing right now about the logo is that it's a little bit, it's got some white around the edges. I created a transparent PNG. You can't do transparent stuff with JPEGs that automatically go flat background, but you can mess around with this. If I knew that I was going to have a specific color background, I would probably want to put it on. Well, I'll get into that. I'll make a separate video for that stuff. But generally, honestly, my stuff's always on white anyway, so I don't usually worry about it. But you can have your things either clear or to have just flat white behind it is fine too, especially if you're doing a JPEG. But generally for logos, which probably don't have any photographs in them, you'd either do a PNG or a GIF. Either way, they're good for graphics. Okay, so moving on, that's one way to do it. And what's really important here is that you always bring them in and have them sized correctly from those programs. So whether you export from Illustrator or Photoshop, they need to be the size that you intend to show them at for your desktop and or laptop, whichever you're designing for the larger sizes, because we want the shrinking to happen with the auto image code that we're adding, not for you to have to shrink it. And besides, if you're going to shrink it at this size, it's just extra weight that you're pulling around, so you might as well just simply make it smaller when you export it from Illustrator or Photoshop. So anyway, size it correctly to start with. Okay, the next part here, I'm going to insert two images just so you can see what's happening. The first one, I'll just show you how to insert it this way. So for this one, you have to know where your cursor is, and then you go to insert, and right at the top here is image. And then you go and find it, and then you drop it. Now you can see again, I'm running into an issue because this box is also way too small. So I'll go ahead and knock that out as well, out of my code. And now you can see that that green is around it. But what else is happening is that that box I set up for my container also had a height on it. And so now it's time to get rid of that as well. It's good to see the colors, you know, while you're working on it. But again, it can be really problematic when you're trying to actually start to create the design with the components it needs. And so for this one, we're taking the height off. There we go. And now the pink is also showing itself towards the bottom. So that's good. That's much better. Now, what I want to show you here is that it also lists the width and the height. I don't recommend this because you're going to be making your stuff squish as it needs to, well, it's going to auto resize, right? So we don't actually need a size on here. The only time you would need a size on there is if you were bringing in an image of one size, but actually telling it, like forcing it to be a different size, which we don't want to do here. That would defeat the purpose. I'm going to show you how that works right here, just so you can see. So I just shrank the image, but it's obviously it's not proportioned. I'd have to change the height as well. But again, try avoid doing any of that because we want it to auto resize. We want it brought in correctly first, so we don't even have to do this. And then again, you're downloading pixels for no reason because it's still downloading a 600 by 800 image. Even if you force it to look smaller on your browser page, it still is actually large. All right, now one other thing here that's showing up that is really important is this alt area. And this is very important for those who are sight impaired or even hearing impaired, because you can, you know, the websites will read, you can have a special thing that will read the websites. And so you have to have alternative text here. So what I would do for this one is maybe say landscape photo of dead branches. Make sure you spell correctly in open field with sun. Now, I mean, you know, you can be as long and descriptive as you want. Now, there is another way that you can also label, but it's most important that you use the alt area to do this. Some people will call it an alt tag. It's not really a tag, it's just extra information. Right now I'm going to open up something called the properties window. Do not mix this up with page properties. It is not the same thing. This is just properties about all sorts of things. So properties, very, very helpful. I use it often. So here you can see your image source, and if you wanted to make it into a link right here, you could. If you were going to use classes on it, let's say that you set up a class to have like a drop shadow or something, you would choose it here. It would be a drop down list of whatever you would have. Here you can change the size again if you want to. And this is you can see now the text is right here. So what you might want to do is have a separate document. I don't require it, but just, you know, if you've got some descriptive things, lots of images, you can type this out in a separate document and simply copy and paste it. Now the title, you know, for some people they'll put a separate title, but that's not what the readers generally read. And so it's most important that you have this filled in. If you want to be on the safe side, you could probably just put both in, and that would be okay too. But I'll go ahead and leave it on there. And I'm gonna do a save. And when you have multiple pages, by the way, you'll probably do save all just to make sure that all your stuff is done, especially when your CSSs are open on separate pages. And then, well, I want to go look at it in the browser. Now, I can do that in one of two ways. I could go to my actual, you know, my Finder window, click on that file that I made, and simply drag it into a browser, and that's off the page here, so I'm not going to do it that way, but that's all you'd have to do and it would launch it. I'm simply going to do it through Dreamweaver because it's here, why not? And then so you choose this icon down here, and then you choose which of, you might not have the same ones here because these are the ones I happen to have installed on my computer. I'm not sure what you have. And then you can click which one of your choice, and I recommend that you open them up in all of the browsers you have to see if there's any discrepancies between them, and you'll get some surprises sometimes. So for example, it doesn't look like there should be a gap here, right? But in Safari, there's a gap of pink between here. So I'm going to have to investigate that to see Why is that? I'm not going to do it right now, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like right now. And then I don't have a reader on mine, but a reader will, list all the stuff. So even my logo should be named with that alt tag. Now I'm going to go put something in here so you can see what happens. Just save that, go back to Safari and take a look. I'm going to refresh now because I did a change. Okay. And so if you hover on something long enough that has a title on it, it pops up. So you can see that now says logo. It does not show up when I do it on this image because I did not put anything on the title. So that's why I was saying sometimes you can do both if you want to. But in terms of for most American with Disabilities Act, for making sure that your stuff is ADA compliant and just nice to people who have some sort of issue that's keeping them from reading or looking at your page the way you would like them to, then make sure that you provide that information for them. All right, so those are the basic ways to add an image. One last way, I'll just go ahead and delete this one so you can see it again. I had inserted an image from the top menu, but remember that our insert menu looks exactly the same. So I could also simply click here and choose my image, and it would also place it. Either way is absolutely fine. Just depends on your personal preferences, to be honest. It does the exact same thing. And then if you want more images, of course, you could just hit the return. So you can see it's selected right now. I can simply use my cursor to push down. If I couldn't push down, I could select the image again, use my arrow key to push off of it, so you can see the cursor's blinking right off of it, and then hit the return key and simply again do another insert.